PhinManiacs.com podcast. I am your host, Louis Sung, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Chad Ronenbaum. And tonight we will have a bevy of guests, including Ron Caniff, and formerly of Unsquish the Fish. Now, what did you call your show again now, Ron?
The new show is the Finns broadcast.
All right, so you got to change your icon.
This the one that you're on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll get rid of this soon. That's a good point.
And Thomas Shannon, a writer for PhinManiacs, as well as his own blog at Bearing. He's at Bearing the News on Twitter. So say hi, Tom.
How you doing?
All right, so we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Later on, we'll be joined by Max Himmelrich of the Deep End Miami. He's become a regular for our show, I think, and he's going to give his own thoughts. But first, we got to make sure that we get the brouhaha between Ron and Tom settled.
I don't think we're going to do that.
Yeah, the Miami Dolphins are going to settle it for us.
Yeah, yep. So let's just to give an idea to everybody what's going on tonight. The Miami Dolphins signed Arian Foster to a 1-year, $1.5 million contract. And that's going to be the cause of a lot of discussion for the next few days. I'm sure it's already been a topic of debate between Ron and Tom, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But then after that, we'll be discussing some of the fans' decisions. Like I put a poll on Twitter the other day, and they decided they made their decision for who they want me to keep a very close eye on in camp, and we'll discuss that and their choice. And then after that, we will discuss the should have and should have nots of the Miami Dolphins offseason. Now, obviously, we all have some very interesting thoughts to give on that because as fans and as journalists, we all think that there are things that the Dolphins did well, some of the things that the Dolphins should have done, and some things that the Dolphins should not have done at all. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But first, we're going to get started with the first thing on the block, Arian Foster, 1-year, $1.5 million contract. As it turns out, only $400,000 of that is actually guaranteed, assuming that he is cut prior to week 1. Now, I personally do not see Arian Foster getting cut for any reason. He's still Arian Foster. He's he's a name, and B, if he is healthy, he's still one of the. I don't want to say he's one of the better running backs in the league anymore, since he's getting up there in age and he's been run into the ground by the Houston Texans. But I imagine that he's still got a little something left in the tank, so I don't see him getting cut. Let's see. 2010, he ran for 1,616 yards, averaged 4.9 yards a carry, and 16 rushing touchdowns on 327 carries. It wasn't until last year that he suddenly started this huge drop-off of just not being able to run well. He only got 163 yards on 63 carries in 2015 before he wound up getting hurt all over again. But every year that he was healthy, even the years that he's run for 1,000 yards at least every single year that he's played the majority of the season. And even then, there was one season where he played only 13 games and he still ran for over 1,200 yards. So just knowing that, we know that Foster has the ability to do it. We know that Foster has excellent vision. We've seen several film reviews, including one by Max himself on his website. Foster is excellent at running out of the backfield. He's probably immediately the Dolphins' best pass blocker in the backfield. So there's a lot of stuff going for Mr. Arian Foster, but what we're going to discuss right now is not whether or not it was a good move or not. What we're going to discuss right now is what is going to be Arian Foster's role with the team. Now, Ron, you wrote a column saying that Foster will be the week 1 starter for the Miami Dolphins, and you laid out your case. And then right after that, Tom, you wrote your own column, literally giving a rebuttal to Ron's story, saying that you're not even sure if he may even make the roster. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys. Ron, since you wrote the column first, you get to be first to make your case live on the radio. Let's go.
All right. So to reiterate, not just what I wrote in the column, but what I've been saying well before we signed Foster, my thoughts on it aren't about I love Foster and I think he's getting back to his Pro Bowl status and whatnot. It's more about I don't feel that the Dolphins' actions show any faith in Ajayi as a starting running back. Obviously, they try to keep Miller. Of course, they should have. I think they underguessed the market a little bit there as far as what running backs would actually get this year compared to previous years, because only one back since 2011 had actually gotten a $6 million a year contract, and that was DeMarco Murray. No other back had since 2011. Then all of a sudden this year, 2 or 3 did. So I think they underguessed the market, and that's what kind of happened in that aspect. Then they tried to sign C.J. Anderson. And mind you, neither one of these are just let's upgrade the unit. These are both let's get a starter. These are starting caliber players they were going after. Then that didn't happen. Then they tried to sign Chris Johnson. I think a lot of people forget about that, but they brought him in for a visit, wanted to sign him. That was March 17th. Then March 29th, they brought Foster in, but he wasn't medically ready, so they let that go. Then the draft came. Now, there was a lot of links with him and Zeke, with the Dolphins and Ezekiel Elliott. Again, so much smoke and mirrors there. I'll give, if you want to just throw that away and say that doesn't really help your case, Ron, because we can't truly know what their interest was in Ezekiel Elliott. I'll give you that. But then they did draft Drake, and he was the third back taken in the whole draft. And we took him in the third round. So I'd say that just definitely shows some interest there as far as trying to upgrade at running back. And then finally, they went ahead and signed Foster. I just think that move after move after move, they're not in love with Jay Ajayi for whatever reason. And I really liked him coming out of Boise State, and I was very excited about him. And I know their words have said they like him, but their actions have said 100% differently. So it's really not about, for me, how much I love Foster and think that he's the savior of the Dolphins. I just feel like if both guys are healthy, they don't, for whatever reason, seem to have faith in Ajayi, and they're going to go with Foster as a week one starter. Now, some people have kidded with me on Twitter, well, what about week two? You know, Teehee, because he won't make it to week two. That you may be right on. You may be right on that. I mean, that's the honest truth. I have zero faith that he's going to make it to week 2, 4, 8, be the starter of the whole season. I have zero faith on that. None of my thought on Foster being the week one starter has anything to do with the fact that I don't feel the Dolphins have faith in Ajayi for whatever reason. There's something there they don't see, or they see something they don't like. I can't know what the reasons are. I just know their actions speak to they've been looking for a way to replace this guy since the beginning of March, since free agency started, bottom line. And who knows what other moves might have been happening or discussions might have been happening behind the scenes that we wouldn't have known were public. Because maybe trades that they tried to attempt or trades they thought about or players they looked at. I mean, you got to imagine if we only saw these 5 or 6, they might have considered 20 or 30 different scenarios. Who knows? I'm just saying, I feel if both guys are healthy, the Dolphins are going to go with Arian Foster week 1 to start, and those are my reasonings. So I'll hand it to you, Tom. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I think you might be reading too much into this situation, which is really ironic because that's usually my job. Uh, I think that it's a mistake to look at every one of the guys that they tried to bring in and put them all in the same box. I think C.J. Anderson, in the prime of his career, looking as good as he did last year, especially toward the end of the season, he's an upgrade. He's an upgrade over Jay Ajayi and Kenyon Drake and Damian Williams. You know, there's no doubt about it. That's a position I would definitely agree. It's a position that could be upgraded. I think the Dolphins are right. I think if they brought the right guy in, that you could do better and they should do better. That's their job. But then you go to Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson went back to Arizona to be a backup. And I don't believe for a second that he would have done that if the Dolphins told him, look, we think you're the starter here. You know, we think you can beat out Jay Ajayi. Sure, you know, they drafted Kenyon Drake as well. They should. It isn't like, you know, Ajayi's been all that healthy either. And they like multiple running backs. But I think what they really want at the position is what football teams always want, and that's youth. And you've got, you know, a 24-year-old Damian Williams, a 23-year-old Jay Ajayi, a 22-year-old Kenyon Drake. Those are the guys that they're looking to take that position and start this year and continue to start for years and years to come. Homegrown guys that come cheap out of the draft. Arian Foster, you know, they brought him in, and I don't think it's a bad move. Don't get me wrong, but he's a different kettle of fish from C.J. Anderson. You can't put him in that box and say, oh, they don't like Ajayi. They're bringing him in because they want him to start. I think they want Ajayi to start. They want the 23-year-old stud that they drafted, and developed last year to start. That's what football teams do. If Arian Foster's starting week 1, that means they're disappointed. That means that the guys that they brought in didn't show what they needed to show to be a starter. Um, I think Foster was brought in for one specific purpose. I think that Gase said he had a very clear vision for how he wanted to use Arian Foster, and that's why they brought him in. And my guess is that that means in spots, and particularly I think they're bringing him in to catch passes and as and maybe a third down back or somebody they can bring in passing situations. He's an excellent receiver, very very difficult to cover by reputation, and he's a pretty good pass blocker. He's ideal in that situation. And if you've got him in on third down, then that means that you don't have a young running back getting Ryan Tannehill killed. If you tried to claim that he would be on the roster week 1 for that purpose, I'd be going along with that. But I don't think he's a starter. And frankly, I don't think it very likely that he's going to be the same back that he was when he was 25 years old. He's going to be 30 when the season starts. And even before last year, there were rumblings amongst Houston fans. They really thought that it was time for Alfred Blue to be the premier back on that team. Statistics aside, you know, it looked like he was wearing down. He has had a rough 7 years. They've really run him into the ground. He's injury prone, and once the season started, he did nothing to disabuse them of that idea. He played and averaged 2.6 yards per carry, and then he ruptured his Achilles. And for those people out there who don't know, no running back has ever come back from a ruptured Achilles and been the same guy again. It doesn't happen. Now that doesn't mean it can't happen, but I don't think you sign a running back thinking that you're going to get the guy that he was before the injury back when it comes to that injury. I think if I know a ruptured Achilles is practically the death knell for a running back, the Dolphins know that too. And they know that he's going to be limited and they're not going to be able to use him as a starter and use him the way the Texans did. I think if the Texans thought that they could do that, he'd still be a Texan, but he's not. The Dolphins signed him. I think they signed him for a specific purpose. And they're signing him hoping that he'll be able to give them a little bit of insurance behind 3 young guys that they aren't real sure about yet. And I think that they're hoping that they'll give him a little something on third down. And that's assuming that he comes back and is at least decent off of this Achilles injury, which is by no means a given. And if he's not at least decent, then he won't make the roster. They're only into him for $400,000. I think that if he's not up to snuff, they'll happily throw that away and cut him before week 1. Now, I'm not saying I think that's going to happen, but I think that if he's the 2.6 yard per carry guy in camp and in the preseason, that they're not going to mess around with keeping him on the roster over somebody younger that they might be able to develop into something. So I definitely don't see him as a starter. I see him as a role player. I see him as insurance behind 3 unknown guys. And I see him as a long shot. And if he comes back really strong, well, then that's great. They caught lightning in a bottle. And, Tannenbaum's one of those guys. He'll sign you. What the heck? Maybe it'll all work out. And I think that's what this might be. So that's my spiel. I don't see him as a starter. I'm hoping he comes back decent or he won't even make the roster. And it's by no means a given at 30 years old with an injury that is that bad for running backs that's going to be the case.
All right, Tom, a thought for you and then a question for you. My first thought is after they lost out on Miller and they lost out on Anderson, I think they still wanted to get a starter guy, but honestly decided to get maybe a little desperate with looking at Chris Johnson and Foster, thinking, well, maybe we can start one of these guys that just has experience because we just feel right now Ajayi is a backup. And again, I'm just guessing at that. It's just my opinion. I don't obviously have any knowledge to know that that's a fact. So they may be wrong on that aspect, but I kind of feel like that might be what they're doing. And then another thought, And you being a Chicago fan, this is actually a perfect question for you. Doesn't Gase usually like to use a guy, and he doesn't switch out guys in different drives? Doesn't he like to put a guy in, and he's like a three down back at least for that drive? Isn't that kind of how his offense ran?
He does like to do that, but I have a suspicion based upon his comment that he had a vision for exactly how to use him, that he might be thinking a little bit different in this case. You know,
I don't. Go ahead.
how
I'm
much
sorry.
of that is Gase and how much of it is John Fox is really hard to guess because the two of them were, like arm in arm most of the time. And now that Gase is out on his own, I don't know that it's a given that, I mean, for sure, he'll still want to bring in guys for whole series. But I don't know that it's a given that there won't be exceptions to that rule. And I think that this might be one of them. I think he's got a veteran guy who's particularly good at one particular aspect of the game. And I think he's flexible enough to use him that way if it's called for. And I think that may happen. And as for Ajayi, I don't know that they see him as a backup. I think they don't see him as an upper echelon running back yet, which is why CJ Anderson would be a better choice. But I don't know that they see Arian Foster as an upgrade. I can't believe that they do, given the circumstances of the signing and given his, recent history. I can't believe that they're depending upon him to start. I'm having a hard time with that.
All right. Well, then I'll say, if they really felt like maybe Ajayi wasn't quite ready, but they feel like they've got a future with Ajayi, but yet you try and re-sign Lamar Miller, which would be a 4-year deal, and try and sign Anderson for a 4-year deal. That doesn't sound to me like you feel like sitting on your bench is a nice, cheap young talent that you feel is getting ready to be that guy
Those are
anytime soon.
Those are upper echelon guys. I think.
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, that just doesn't feel to me. That I mean, when you got a guy that you think's close and can do the job, you'll take that money and spend it in places you need to spend it, like cornerback and linebacker, where we're much more desperate. I just don't think their actions indicate they have faith in Ajayi. That is how I felt since the beginning of March, and I won't change my mind until I see Ajayi starting day one with a healthy Foster sitting on the bench behind him.
They didn't pay Arian Foster a whole lot. I mean, it isn't like they blew.
I don't think the contract has anything to do with it either way. That's the thing.
I think that you're looking at this honestly in black and white terms, and I think that there's some running backs that are better than others, and Lamar Miller's better than C.J. Anderson. C.J. Anderson is a much better bet than a relative unknown Jay Ajayi, but that doesn't mean that Jay Ajayi can't and won't start, or that they don't see him as a starter. They just don't see him as, an upper 20% of the league starter, and neither do I. But I watched him last year well enough to know that, he can do the job, reasonably well. I think he's at least a middle of the pack guy. I think the problem is that he's relatively young. You've got a brand new coaching staff, and they haven't seen any of these guys play live yet. No live action. And I think they'd like to have a little security blanket, and I don't blame them for that. And I think that Foster fits more into that role. It's a different role than a C.J. Anderson or a Lamar Miller, where you're looking to upgrade the position, and they would have upgraded the position because those guys are A, proven to be very good, and B, upgrades. And I'm not sure that Arian Foster is going to be an upgrade coming off of an Achilles injury in a season where he averaged 2.6 yards per carry.
All right, so now I want to see if we can get maybe a 2 out of 3 vote on this. So I'm going to bring in Chad now. Chad, do you have any thoughts to add to this? Like, if you had to pick a side, whose are you on?
I'll hate you forever, Chad.
I think Chad got bored. He fell asleep.
Mr. Ronenbaum.
You're muted out, Chad.
Crickets, man, crickets.
All right. Okay, then. Well, I guess I'll give my thoughts on the whole thing. I mean, this is gonna sound like a total cop out, but I don't feel. I feel like as I don't want to say it like this, but I kind of feel like you're both right and you're both wrong, because I look at it like this: no, Foster is not going to be the starter, at least not in my mind. I think that is firmly in the hands of Jay Ajayi, unless somehow Foster either does really well or Ajayi just kind of falls flat on his face. But at the same time, I also don't see Foster being like this total just in case everybody else flops either, because if it would take Ajayi falling on his face and Drake and Williams and all these other guys kind of just being horrible in order for Foster to get some significant playing time, then if that's the case, then I would have just stuck with somebody like Isaiah Peed, because he's not going to be. Why would you bother paying somebody like Arian Foster, who, as you say, Tom, over and over again, is coming off an Achilles injury? He may not. It's not known how much he has in the tank left. So if he's really just there to be just in case everything else is, if he's there as a failsafe, then I would have just gone with another body in there, because if Foster's not going to be anything special, then why not just stick with Isaiah Peed? Why not bring in Daniel Thomas for the umpteenth time in Dolphins history? You might as well go with that. If Foster is not that special, then why pay him anything at all?
Well, I think you're misinterpreting a little bit. I think he is a fail-safe in that he's sort of a security blanket, but I don't think that's all he is. I think that if everything works out and Ajayi is everything they think he can be, that Arian Foster still may have a role in this offense. And I personally see it as being in the passing game. I think as a receiver out of the backfield, and I think as a blocker on third down, I think he could see playing time in that role, even if everything works out. I think it's possible if he turns out to have recovered from the injury enough to be a reasonably good runner, that could be his role on the team. And I think that could be the quote clear vision unquote that Gase has of how he wants to use him if everything works out well. And then if it doesn't work out well, and Ajayi and Damian Williams and let him down, and Drake isn't ready to go, then you can start him. He's your security blanket. He's the fail-safe. But that doesn't have to be the only reason why they signed him.
Well, I understand that point. It's just that I don't know. I just feel like that Foster's going to do more than what than I don't think he's going to be just a role player. I would think that he's going to be here to be the primary backup while Kenyon Drake learns how to gets himself accustomed to the NFL, because let's not forget that Kenyon Drake is kind of banged up too. So it's not like he's just getting himself acclimated to the NFL. No, he's also having to deal with some injury stuff, and I think it was a hamstring that he wound up having at near the end of minicamp. So he's already showing that he's a little messed up. So,
and I have to say, and I heard this on another podcast, a Dolphins podcast recently. It cracks me up that people think that we got Foster because of a reaction to Kenyon Drake. So how we tried out Foster on March 29th as a reaction to a running back we didn't have yet? No.
No, we brought no. Here, Ron. Here's Ron. Here's what it is. They brought in Arian Foster for a workout because they just realized, oh crap, we signed Daniel Thomas again. We got to do something.
Yeah, and Chris Johnson on March 17th, which in my mind, except one being injured, one isn't. It's kind of like the same guy, the older vet that maybe has a year left. To me, it was all a reaction to their situation at the time, which had Ajayi going into week one with Ajayi as their starting running back, and they don't want that. That's their hope. Their hope is that they catch lightning in a bottle and he's the week one starter. That is what they are hoping to happen, because their actions speak to that, because they were looking at these guys 5-6 weeks before the draft even happened. So it's not about, oh, we've got these young guys, in Grant and Drake, and we can't make those the third round guys. We need to find an upgrade for a third down back. We didn't have those guys yet, and we were looking at Chris Johnson and Arian Foster. So that cannot be the reason.
Well, one thing to bear in mind with Arian Foster as a backup, he's not going to play special teams. So, there aren't very many backup running backs in this league that don't do that. So,
well, that would be Kenyon Drake's deal, is doing special teams.
Exactly, and Ajayi will be playing special teams. He'll be the backup.
Well, I don't think so. I kind of doubt that. I think that if I'm the Miami Dolphins, I want to see the 23-year-old Ajayi take that job. I don't want to see a 30-year-old broken down, injury prone Arian Foster coming off of a serious injury taking that job because it probably means bad things for Ajayi.
I will say this.
I would agree with you on that, and that's kind of my point. I don't think they like him very much. I
I
don't think this staff likes Ajayi very much.
I
I
Go
I
ahead.
want to say this. No, Sean Moreno, when he came to Miami, was also coming off a severe injury, and the moment that he came back, he came out like a bird out of blazes, and he racked up over 100 yards on the New England Patriots. So,
Yeah,
like,
definitely. It wasn't the same injury, so I
no, it
can
wasn't
see
the
where
same.
Tom's
No, no,
going with
no,
that.
it wasn't the
But
same
when,
injury. But
as a Dolphins fan, and we saw it even in camp, although camp it's hard to tell with running backs. You really have to see the game. You could tell instantly when he had the ball in his hands and started running. There was a clear difference between him and the other backs. Now that has nothing to do with
Even
Ajayi.
Lamar Miller,
Even Lamar Miller, you could see the instantly you could see it with your eyes. Whoa, that guy just looks way different than the other backs. He's just on a different level. And I'm envisioning that you may see that with Foster right from the get go too. But I don't know that for sure because we haven't seen him run since the injury, which I will give Tom. That is an injury that running backs don't come back from. I just think the Dolphins are hoping that he does.
strangely enough, I also want to point this out. It almost feels like Lamar Miller didn't really come onto the scene until after Noshawn pretty much yanked the job away from him, and then he got hurt again.
Yeah, you're right. I think Noshawn might have kind of helped Lamar as far as in the room. A lot of the things that Foster may do too. And Foster may come in just like Noshawn, be in was a starter for 1 week and then get hurt, and then Ajayi takes the reins. I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm just saying all things equal, both guys are healthy week one. I think they want Foster to start. I think that's really what they want.
Okay, and one more thing before I bring Chad in because he's got himself ready to go now.
Okay.
I want to say this. If I had to pick a choice, if I had to make a choice between Foster and Moreno to be the tutor, I'm taking Foster every single time because, with all due respect to Noshawn Moreno, I love him and I totally respect him for what he did against the Patriots. Moreno is a character. I don't know how else to put it. He's everybody who's ever talked about him has said he's strange. I don't want to use that word because strange because what does that even imply? But Foster, there's nothing really weird or whatever about him. He's just straight up leader of the pack guy you look to. He's the mentor that I think Ajayi could use. Now, with that said, Chad, do you want to try and come in and break the tie here? So, whose side are you on?
Well, I've kind of listened to everybody, and I understand both points. I guess from my perspective, I absolutely disagree with Ron that the organization does not like Ajayi. I think they do like him. I think that they didn't have a veteran back at all. I mean, they had Jay Ajayi, and then they drafted Drake. They had no veteran back to put with them, and so that tells me they don't really know for sure what they have. And so they were looking for a veteran back without a doubt to put in with the mix. I don't think they necessarily are looking for a back to come in and carry the ball 15 to 20 times a game type of running back, but they're looking for a veteran that can pick up the offense and run certain formations. As I've kind of mentioned in the last few shows, I absolutely don't think there's going to be starting positions traditionally like you're used to seeing with a lot of teams with Adam Gase. I think you're going to see a lot of different formation groupings with players with certain skill sets. And I think he wanted a player that can do some of the Matt Forte, for example, type stuff. And that's what Arian Foster can do. He's clearly a superior player out of the backfield catching the football than what they had. And whether or not he's a superior runner than Ajayi at this point in the career, I don't know that the Dolphins even know that. But they definitely didn't feel good about just having Ajayi and Drake as a running back. I wouldn't either because, as you guys have all known since Ajayi was drafted, I've been saying he runs way too upright and he exposes himself to way too severe of blows to his body. And I'll still stand by that. I don't see Jay Ajayi being able to carry the football over a couple hundred times and still be on his feet. I think he'll get hurt. Drake has already pulled his hamstring, in minicamp. And so I think this is a bigger testament that the team doesn't feel comfortable with Daniel Thomas and Damian Williams running the football, and you get just one of those guys hurt, Drake or Ajayi go down, you don't play football in the NFL anymore with just a running back taking all the carries. That immediately puts Daniel Thomas or Damian Williams getting carries in a game. And I don't think there's any debate that Arian Foster is more than likely an upgrade over those guys. And so it makes a lot of sense in that regard. And I think it'll be a split back system. I think, again, you're going to see formations all over the place. I think you'll see Jakeem Grant coming in certain times. I think you'll see Duarte coming in at certain times. You'll definitely see Arian Foster coming in and out of the game using his skill sets. I think it'd be foolish of the Dolphins to plan on using him as like a bell cow type back. I don't think he's at that point in his career. And with the injury history he's had the last 2 years, I just don't see Miami pounding Arian Foster with the football. They're going to use Jay Ajayi to pound the football. But I also think that they don't, to Ron's point, I don't think they feel 100% comfortable that Ajayi can run their whole offensive package. And there's going to be formation schemes and certain teams even that Foster's a better matchup. In particular, the beginning of the season, I would not want to go into Seattle followed by into New England with running backs that have almost no NFL experience. That I would much rather have the ball in Arian Foster's hands in those situations. But I think as the season wears on, the guy that's going to get the pounding is going to be Ajayi. He'll probably get the more straight ahead running plays and the more carries. But it wouldn't shock me, even though Ajayi gets more carries, that Foster gets more snaps. I mean, that's just my take on it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, and I read this in Pro Football Focus, and I thought it was really interesting. Adam Gase really likes to run the inside zone run, and the Bears they averaged 4.2 yards per carry on those runs last year. Ajayi was a half a yard more per carry than the Bears, and 1.6 per carry more than Foster running inside zone plays.
Okay, but
That
Tom,
yeah.
Tom, I think that might have been inflated a little bit by the two really big 20-yard runs, because if we take those away, the number really isn't that impressive.
Yeah, I mean,
The-
Ajayi didn't have. I don't know if he had enough big enough sample size of really. I mean, maybe I don't
He
know.
broke free twice. That really helped him out in
He was
numbers
hurt
wise.
most of the season. So
Yeah, I would say though on film, guys, I feel pretty confident in saying this. Ajayi is an unbelievable one cut and go runner, and I
Yeah.
think he'll be superior to.
He's a
Foster.
much better inside runner than Foster, and I think he fits their running scheme better than Foster will. I think Foster will be better out of the backfield. I think that Chad's right on the button. I think that's what they envision him doing, and I think they'd like to split him out and have him run routes. And I think they'd like to have him in on third down to block and catch passes out of the backfield. I think that's where he really excels. And I don't think Ajayi's bad in that spot either. From what I saw late in the year last year, I thought he was fine. But Foster is one of the best, and he has been traditionally one of the best in the league at that. And if he recovers even half of his skills, I think that that might be what the plan is for him. I wouldn't be at all surprised. But I think Ajayi's going to be, if they're going to have a guy that they're going to have in the majority of the time just to carry the football, I think he's going to be the guy. And I think that Kenyon Drake is going to be right in there with him for a good part of the year, wherever they think they can trust him.
Alrighty then. Well, now we have another caller. It's not Max, but it is another good friend of mine, and I'm glad he's calling in. Oh wait, never mind. Sorry. All right. So well, I wonder where Max is though. He said he'd come in at about 8:30, and I guess he decided to change his mind or something. Oh well. So I guess we'll revisit this topic a little bit later. So in the meantime, we'll go ahead and move on to the next thing on the block. Let's see. I put a poll back on Monday morning or Monday evening rather. I'm sorry, asking what would everybody like me to keep a very close eye on, and what the poll says, according to what I have here, that poll turned into a result where it was a very close split between Laramie Tunsil and Ryan Tannehill. Of course, I honestly am thinking that I shouldn't have put Tannehill as one of the options because, of course, everybody wants to see what Tannehill's doing. Of course, everybody wants to know what the franchise quarterback is up to. So maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I digress. It's done. Laramie Tunsil won by about 3%. As the last time I checked the poll, it was Laramie Tunsil at 36% and then Ryan Tannehill at 33. So I'm going to ask Chad first, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think of the fans' decision to pick Laramie Tunsil as their guy that they really want me to keep a close eye on? And rather, I should say us because we're going to be at camp too. So
I think that's typical fans loving the number one draft pick. uh, Laramie Tunsil, I'm personally not that worried about how well he plays guard. I'm much more concerned about him being ready at any time to take over for Brandon Albert and play a high level left tackle. I know anybody that's a guard will get mad at me, but guards are a dime a dozen compared to a dominant left tackle. And so I want to make sure they get him ready because I personally don't see Brandon Albert making it through a whole season anymore every snap. Maybe he will pull it off this year, but I think sooner than later, Laramie Tunsil needs to be ready to take over and be that solid, stable left tackle. So we'll see how many reps he gets in at guard, but I'm not really worried if he's a dominant guard or not. It'd be nice if he's good at it, but it's hard to evaluate in camp. You need full on contact, and even when you're getting full on contact, a guy like Ndamukong Suh or whatever, he's not going to do very many snaps where he's going all out because they can't risk getting him hurt. So it's going to be hard to evaluate guards anyway. So that would be my thoughts on Tunsil. In terms of players, I think are much more interesting. Definitely Tannehill's way more interesting because we're going to see how he's doing in that Gase system, and so that's going to be an interesting one to watch. So I'm much more interested in watching Tannehill than I am Tunsil.
well, that's fair. That's fair enough. Okay, how about you guys? Tom, you're not. I don't think you're going to be able to see much of camp other than what we're going to be reporting. So, if as an outsider, who are you interested? Do you agree with the fans on Laramie Tunsil, or do you pick someone else?
I kind of agree in that, you know, look, if you want to know how good your team's going to be, you got to watch the line of scrimmage because that's where the games are won and lost, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe that's an old fashioned thing, but that's what I really watch when I watch games. It's the first thing I do. Now, Laramie Tunsil, I probably wouldn't specifically be too worried about him, but I would be worried about how those guards looked in general. And, I think I said this before. I may have even said it to you. Uh, if Dallas Thomas comes out as your starting guard at a camp, then that's probably a very bad sign because that means that, those guys weren't doing too good. But if you want one specific position that I would watch if I was standing there, it would be whatever side the tackle was on opposite Ndamukong Suh. Because last year, you know, in my opinion, that was the weak point. That was the reason why they were poor against the run. Um, and that side of the line of scrimmage provided almost no pass rush. I'd be watching the defensive tackles other than Sue, because in my opinion, the defense is only going to be as good as that tackle is going to be. And last year, that tackle wasn't too good in my opinion. So those are the guys that I would watch. I would watch the other defensive tackles as a group, see how they were doing, and try to see if any of those guys was going to step up and be a stopper at the line of scrimmage.
All right, and while we're still waiting on Duke, we have our other guest who came in now, Max Himmelridge of the Deep End Miami. Max, I'm going to go ahead and get you right off the bat here. I'm going to tell you what we're talking about. I made the poll on Twitter, and I asked who do everybody want me to keep an eye out on, and I guess this also goes to you since you'll be at camp too. And according to the poll results, 31% of fans voted for Ryan Tannehill, 35% voted for Tunsil. Then we got 27 for Devontae Parker, and then we got 6% for other, and a lot of the others were Kiko Alonso. So we'll go ahead and make that the fourth choice. But the winner was Tunsil at 35%, and that's who the fans are really curious about coming into training camp. Now, do you agree with the fans on who they decided to keep an eye on, or do you have somebody else in mind?
Well, I got good news for you, Lewis. You don't have to watch Tannehill before he throws it, and you don't have to watch Tunsil after he throws it, so you can watch both. But I'm interested not in really either of those guys, any of those guys. I think we at least we think we know what Tunsil's going to be, and Tannehill's problem is not his arm; it's his ability to process the defense, which you don't really get a read on in training camp. What I'm interested to see is the cornerbacks, because it's not a question of scheme. You shouldn't evaluate anything scheme related in training camp because you're not practicing against a live anything. It just there's no evaluation there. But if you're just testing pure physical ability, the best positions to evaluate are receiver and corner. If you can get separation, or if you can stop the receiver from getting separation, then at the respective positions, that's a win. I'm gonna for the vast majority of training camp be watching the cornerbacks to see how they respond, because the Dolphins have a very good receiving core, so it'll be a good test. It's not like last season when we watched the defensive line in training camp, but we were all salivating, but then we get to the regular season and we realized that they weren't really doing much considering what they were going up against. I'll be very interested to see how the cornerbacks do. How does Byron Maxwell do when he has to switch on to Kenny Stills deep? Because Byron Maxwell got burned deep. How will Xavier Howard do? Because he really struggles to stick with guys deep. Will they be able to work with Rashad Jones, who likes to, who gets his hand caught in the cookie jar at times? It's going to be very interesting to see how that position group shakes out.
Which is ironic, since Duke and I had a very good discussion earlier today about that very thing, getting separation, being able to keep the receivers as if the secondary.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, with Stills, for a fast guy, Kenny Stills doesn't do a great job of getting separation.
And that's another thing that Duke talked about with me, is he used Devontae Parker as an example. If Parker makes a leaping catch into the end zone for a touchdown, I mean, that's all well and good, but that would mean that he had to compensate for the fact that he couldn't get separation to begin with, and that's not a good thing. So
well, luckily I published an article about this earlier this week, and I can riff on it for a second if you don't mind. The way that Adam Gase works, especially in the red zone, is that you don't necessarily need separation in terms of area of the field. You gain separation through physical traits. So Devontae Parker, more importantly than being 6'4", 6'5", he has he has a huge wingspan. He's built like an NBA player. When you see him, Lewis, you and I both saw it last year at training camp. He looks like a small forward. Like, he walks out there, he's smooth, and he really, even though his top end speed isn't great, he has those long arms. So basically what Adam Gase likes to do is let receivers box out the corner behind them and then extend their long arms. So the ball doesn't necessarily go as often into the receiver's chest. It's really about leading the receiver, not as much hitting them between the numbers. If you have a guy like Jarvis, you want to hit him between the numbers. But if you're talking about a guy like Devontae Parker, you want to put the ball away from the direction that the corner is moving in so that the corner can't get there. If Devontae Parker extends his arms and uses his body, his wingspan is always going to be longer than the corners. There's no corner in the NFL with a wingspan of like Devontae Parker, except for maybe Richard Sherman. So we'll find out week 1. But when he extends, he has the ability to catch the ball away from the corner, which helps avoid some of those bad throws in traffic. Adam Gase is not a jump ball guy. You're not going to see – he's never really had – Demaryius Thomas, while he's a great big-bodied receiver, he's not really such a jump ball guy based on what I've seen. It'll be really interesting to see. Alshon Jeffrey was on one leg last year. It was not good watching him. He was hobbling. But Devontae Parker will be a serious weapon for him, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he utilizes him without separation in terms of yardage, but separation in terms of body position.
All right, Ron, thoughts?
It was definitely for me the same as Max, the cornerbacks. I feel like there may be no question mark on our team bigger right now than there. We just have no idea what Byron Maxwell is going to be. It's just the tale of two seasons for him, and then you have a rookie, So
I want to make sure that Lewis keeps his eye on me so I don't get hurt, and I'll keep my eye on Lewis and we'll make sure that we don't have any casualties, but we won't get much scouting done.
Oh my gosh, really?
I've been telling Lewis for years that or at least last year, he needs to walk up to Sue, slap him in the face, and tell him who's in charge.
I don't. Okay, yeah, you do that. I'll stick by the smaller people. No, I'll go mess up Jakeem Grant. Actually, no, he'll probably mess me up anyway.
Yeah, I skipped the gym tonight. Lewis, I skipped the gym tonight to go on this show, so if I lose my fist fight with Indomitian Sue, you know why.
Yeah.
That's the only reason.
I wouldn't want to take on Jakeem Grant either. I don't care if he is 5'6".
I'd much rather fight Ryan Tannehill than Jakeem Grant. Are you kidding? But did you guys see the season premiere of Ballers? Dolphins players all over the place.
I think that's become their thing now, right? Wasn't Jared Odrick on the last season?
It's kind of interesting because the fictitious character Ricky Jarrett, who is the receiver, and basically the premise of the first episode is that he's trying to get a contract extension with the Dolphins, and the Dolphins pay someone else. They pay another guy on the team. And then Jarvis Landry walks up, like actual Jarvis Landry, and is like, hey, we're so pissed that they paid the other guy. Like, Jarvis Landry is actually like, on the Dolphins in this show, like, participating in the plot. And then, like, the beginning, the whole opening is at Indomitian Sue's new restaurant in Miami called Sue Casa, which doesn't actually exist. But, like, they've, like, spun this whole thing. Rashad Jones is in it. Sue is there. There was someone else. It's crazy.
Well, we know what to blame it on if the Dolphins fall apart this year.
And Larry Zonka being the head coach is also amazing. I don't know if you guys know, Larry Zonka is the head coach of the Dolphins in Ballers.
Okay.
It's actual Larry Zonka.
The organization better be getting paid for this because.
And they use Stephen Ross's name.
I wouldn't be surprised.
They say Mr. Ross. It's great publicity. It's great publicity for the Dolphins. If the Dolphins are going to sign free agents without having to overpay as stupidly as they have in the past, they just need to be about South Beach. They need to be about Miami. That's what they need to be. They need to make players want to be there.
They need to push the whole South Beach angle.
Swagger, like the Heat. Exactly like what the Heat do.
Well, they got to win first, I think, before they can push any of that.
That's true.
All right. So now that you're here, Max, let's go ahead and revisit our first topic before we get into the off-season should and should have nots. But essentially, we discussed between Ron and Tom. Ron thinks that Arian Foster will be the Week 1 starter, not because of anything Foster's done, but because the Dolphins' actions do not match their supposed outspoken love for Ajayi. While Tom is thinking that at best, Arian Foster is going to be a role player in the offense. He's messed up. He's banged up, and no running back has ever made it back from his specific injury. So I'm going to ask you to. We've already broken the tie technically twice now, but let's go ahead and let you break the tie between Ron and Tom. What do you think about Foster and what he's gonna? Do you think he'll start? Do you think he'll be cut? What's going to happen?
I think Ron and Tom are both idiots. No, I'm just kidding. But
nothing to do with this, right? Just think that.
Right. I was
totally unrelated.
I was planning on introducing myself with that before I heard your opinion. But no,
Sure.
It's I'm a big Arian Foster fan. I was, when I was first like getting into football, I guess, like when I was really understanding the schematics of the game, like 5 years ago, was when Arian Foster was having that great breakout season. He had the 2010 and the 2012, and he's great. And when he's healthy, he is great. The problem is he's never going to be the same. He's never going to be Arian Foster of 2010 and 2012. And on that end, I think Tom is correct. Tom is correct in that he won't be who he's not going to be. He's not going to be that MVP caliber player. But I think Ron is right. I think a healthy Arian Foster is still the starter, but not saying anything about Foster, just saying something about the Dolphins running back corps. Foster's not a change of pace back. He's an every down player. He catches the ball. He can throw his body in the way. He's not a great blocker, but I mean, neither is Jay Ajayi. And there's really nothing that Foster doesn't do better than Jay Ajayi at this point, except for power running up the middle. But that's not Adam Gase's MO. until you get down on the goal line. I think we'll get 8 games out of Foster, maybe. I hope. And I think he's good for 1 win. That's what I said. I said on our podcast, on the Deep End Miami podcast last night, I asked our panel what the win-loss effect of Arian Foster is. I think it's 1 game. You know, we saw in the 2014 season with no Sean Moreno in week 1, or is that 2013? Either way, it was no Sean Moreno's big, 120-some yard game, 2 touchdowns, whatever it was. And he gave the Dolphins a win. I think Arian Foster does something very similar. And hopefully it's in week 1 or 2, because the Dolphins are going to need that. The Dolphins need to steal one of those games. And now that Brady's out, it's more likely the Patriots game. It still isn't an easy game by any means, but it's going to be interesting. I would say that could be the game, but when the Dolphins go into Foxborough, the problem isn't that Tom Brady scores too many points. It's that Ryan Tannehill can never help the offense put up enough. Ryan Tannehill has historically bad games in Gillette. I think Ryan Tannehill's a good quarterback, and he still struggles so badly in that stadium, as do many quarterbacks. But that could be the Arian Foster game. Like, there's going to be 1 week where Arian Foster has 180 yards from scrimmage with 2 touchdowns, and it's enough to help the Dolphins win. Knowing our luck, it'll be in week 17, and we'll end up with the 3rd overall pick. But I expect him to start, like Ron says, but kind of be more the player that Tom says. Start as a role player.
So, in other words, you kind of pick them both.
Yeah, no, I do think he'll start, and I don't think he's going to be as good as he once was. I think he's going to be better than – I'm going right in the middle of where they are.
Well, I think you're leaning a little more towards Ron, so I'm going to let Tom have his rebuttal.
Go for it.
Well, I pretty much said all I can say at this point. I don't know how you can be a starter and a role player at the same time. I mean, he's going to be one or the other. I mean,
no, you can be both. That's when you run into problems. That's when your team is bad. Like the Dolphins are going to be.
I would disagree with one thing you said in particular that hasn't come up yet, and that's you said that running inside wasn't Adam Gase's MO. Almost half the runs last year were inside zone. And it was Jay Ajayi's strength. I brought this up a little bit earlier. I think that he's going to be the guy that they're going to give the rock when they want to keep it on the ground this year. I think when you're going to see Ajayi is going to be when they're more in kind of a pass mode. And I don't know.
Well, they changed the system a lot because that was Matt Forte's strength going into training camp. Matt Forte is arguably the best running back in the league doing that. But Adam Gase in Denver, really, he had 2 entirely different running styles for 2 different backs in Ronnie Hillman, C.J. Anderson. C.J. Anderson plays a little bit like Jay Ajayi, and so I think you could be right. I could actually come back on that. You know, Adam Gase is going to do whatever his running backs need, and you're right. That's a big strength of Jay Ajayi.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. I don't think it was a bad signing. Sometimes, you give people that impression when you're arguing that they're not going to be the same player. They're coming back from terrible injuries. They didn't sink a lot of money into this guy. And I don't think it's a bad risk to take, and you never know. I mean, he could come back great. I don't think it's going to happen, but he could. So I guess my last word on the matter is I don't want anybody out there to think, that I'm sort of down on the signing. I'm really not. I think that he could have a role on the team. I just don't see him as the starter. I think Jay Ajayi is going to probably be that guy. We'll find out.
All right, and now I want to go.
The point you brought. Whatever you say, whatever anyone thinks about Arian Foster as a player, that signing is great work. I mean, worst case scenario is that they're the same that they were on Sunday.
And that's
it just doesn't make a difference. And if the Dolphins need a running back, next season is the off season to do it. They could have 5 running backs go in the first round. If you look at Fournette, McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Royce Freeman, Nick Chubb if he's healthy. I'm probably missing one even. That's super obvious, I'm sure. There's Samaje Perine, who could be a late first, early second. If the Dolphins need a running back, And if they're picking in that 5 to 10 range, they could be in a really good spot to grab someone.
All right, and now for the final input on this whole Arian Foster debate, I bring in my good friend Chris Early, otherwise known as Duke. How are you this evening?
I'm good.
All right, so you've heard the arguments, you've heard the discussions, so we're going to put a head on this whole Arian Foster thing, and we're going to let you have the last word. So have at it, Duke.
I mean, I like the signing. You always need depth at running back. I mean, it's rare that you're going to have any more in the NFL show that you're going to have.
Duke, you're kind of coming in. Call back in. Can't really hear you. See if you can call in again. Or is that me? Oh. Can anybody hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Breaking
It
up.
sounds like, yeah, it sounds like your connection's bad in general.
Yeah, I kind of had a little I cannot.
Oh, there you go.
Oh my,
Yeah.
hello? Oh my goodness. Well,
Are we
that
on the air?
Everything.
yeah, we're on the air. That was a little embarrassing. I guess we haven't
I was
worked out
just
all the
saying,
kinks
my
after all.
parting words, I guess we could start like juggling now, but my parting words before the whole thing went kablooey were, Lewis, I have so much respect for you for running a live show. And then, boom. But, I mean, back to what we could talk about Arian Foster a little more if you'd like. Make sure we keep the viewers happy.
Well,
Arian Foster. Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. This is a
So
little...
Arian Foster.
Go ahead.
Arian Foster, when healthy, is one of the best backs in the NFL at two things: patience and vision. Without one, the other is not ever that effective. You know, they can be good, but not great. You see both in a guy like Le'Veon Bell, who's one of the smarter running backs in the NFL when healthy. You know, some of these guys it's such a high impact position that, you know, you're taking the same level of physical abuse that offensive and defensive linemen take, but you have so much less body weight on you to make it okay.
Yeah, I get you. Okay, Duke, we kind of had a technical difficulty with Skype, so you want to try and say what you were going to say again?
I was going to say, I think he's a good sign. You need depth to running back position. I mean, I don't know that it matters who really starts. I think you're probably going to get an equal number of carries. I think the Dolphins need to run the ball more. They were last in carries. Last year they averaged 21 carries a game. Oftentimes that that was on the high end thanks to a few games. A lot of times they were in 15 carries or less for a game. So if they can get that, if they can get somewhere around 400 carries total, there's about 25 a game. That'll put them in the average spot. And I think you need guys to split that. So we don't know what Kenny and Drake's bringing to the table at this point. Damian Williams kind of know what he is. So you're looking at guys that's going to get 10 to 12 carries a piece, and I think that's what you do. You don't want to, when you ride the hot hand, if Ajayi or Foster, whoever's running well, and the defense can't stop them, you keep doing it. But otherwise, I think they're going to, it's a backfield by committee, and you've got a veteran guy now that knows what he's doing. He can kind of let the younger guys can kind of lean on him for some things, and you've got the young fresh legs that you hope can develop. So I like it.
right, then we're gonna put the Arian Foster discussion to a close now.
Dude,
For the
I missed. Dude, your analysis is always so like even, and it's always so smooth. It's a very soothing brand of football analysis.
Duke knows his stuff.
Duke's the man.
Well, I don't think this deal turns the dial really one way or the other. You know, re-signing Miller or Anderson would have done that. I don't think Arian Foster does, because he is coming off an injury. He has been one of the better backs in the league, but he can't stay healthy. So you've got a guy that has potential to be very good. You've got some young guys that have potential to be very good. So it's kind of like you just got this mix of potential, one being injury, the other being youth, and you just don't know what you've got. But you know, I like the depth. I mean, otherwise, there's always the possibility that you could go into a game with Daniel Thomas and Isaiah Peed as your running backs, and you just don't want that. And what I said when it first happened was that, you know, I see Ajayi as the starter. I think that's the guy they want to become the full-time guy. You hope he becomes that guy, because he's got more mileage left. But you know, if he gets injured and has to miss a game, then Miami's leaning on Drake, Damian Williams, Daniel Thompson, those guys. Now you've got a guy. So, well, you know, he may not be the same guy, but at least he knows what he's doing. You can put him in there. So, you know, that's just kind of what this is. I mean, I don't think there's really too much special or unspecial about the signing. It's just, to me, it's good depth, and worst case, the contingency plan if someone gets if one of your younger guys gets hurt.
Can you imagine if, like, in 2011 or 2012, someone told us that we were going to have Ndamukong Suh, Cameron Wake, Mario Williams, Arian Foster, like all these guys like that were big names then, and like now, like, we're so down. And like if you said like expectations were 6 and 10 for a team with those players.
Yeah, it just goes to show how fast the NFL changes in such a short time. So just to make the final tally on this whole Foster thing, sounds to me like Max is more on Ron's side, Duke is a little more on Tom's side, and me and Chad did a cop out and said it's both. So
cool. So it looks like we got a steel cage match scheduled for the first day of training camp.
Yep. Well, Tom's hiding in Chicago, so we're not going to get anywhere there.
Got it.
All right. So
will Chad be there?
Chad, I'm pretty sure Chad's going to be there for at least the Web weekend training camp. I don't know. All right, Chad, you going to stay for more than that? And Chad has disappeared again.
Well, let me say this: you were talking earlier about Noshawn Marino and kind of the effect he had on Lamar Miller, and I don't remember who else said it, but they were correcting it. Lamar Miller was a different type of runner than Noshawn Marino, and then after Noshawn Marino, Miller kind of became more of a runner like Marino. He started breaking more tackles, running a little bit differently, running with a little more patience. You know, I don't know that I worry about that with Ajayi as much. He seems like a guy that, if anything, he's kind of on the opposite side of Miller, whereas Miller seemed a little more like a timid runner. Ajayi seems to be more like an aggressive runner, just like I'm going to, you know, just like he needs to tone it down a notch and get a little more patience. And so I you know, I like that aspect, in that I don't think we're going to have to worry about him, you know, being that guy that's going to run up into the pile when it's third and short and just kind of fall down. I think he's going to be the guy that just, you know, keeps trying to push and go at it. So I think that if anything he can learn from Foster would be the patience side.
And we could definitely use a little bit of patience without the dancing that Reggie Bush did. And funny enough, Reggie Bush might just go back to Detroit where he got booted out before, but that's neither here nor there. I want to go ahead and switch to the final topic of the night, the final plan topic anyway, because I'm sure we'll go off the rails somewhere along the lines. We always do. Anyway, the final topic that I had planned for tonight was what if there was something that the Miami Dolphins we felt like they should have done in the offseason, or if they shouldn't have done in the offseason. Now we've talked ad nauseum about all the things that we liked about this offseason. We liked the whole we obviously we like the whole Arian Foster signing. Good job, Miami. You did that good. We like the fact that we extended Cam Wake a couple more years, so now he's a little cheaper, and we get to keep a legend. We like the whole Devontae Parker thing. We like Jarvis Landry being here, and we like all these things that the Dolphins have done. That's a good job. Ifo Ekpre Olamu, yeah, awesome. We did a good job there. But now my question is a little bit different, and I'm gonna start with Tom, as since he's the guy who he doesn't come on the show as often, so I'm gonna start with him. Is there anything that the Dolphins did, or rather they didn't do, that you felt they should or should have not? And I am in the cold. Ron, you do it. Hello, can anybody hear me?
I can hear you, so I can go for it. Cold world.
Yeah, I'm good.
Left-handed.
all my guys are they're all ditching me.
I'll bring out the positivity cannon first, and then rain on my own parade. The draft had a plan, which is the biggest, most brilliant part of this offseason. The draft, there was an actual cohesive plan, which was magnificent. They went in, they were going to get the offensive personnel, they were going to establish depth on that side of the ball. There was a plan. Now a little bit of negativity. I don't think it was the right plan. They didn't build anything at the line of scrimmage in the draft, except for Laramie Tunsil, one guy. And the problem really also is depth. I like the Jermon Bushrod signing, but I think it's like the DJ Khaled thing. Like, they played themselves. The Dolphins played themselves in free agency. They wanted Alex Boone and they wanted Pac-Man. They didn't get either of them. I think this would have been the entire perception of the season would have been different had we had Pac-Man Jones back there in the secondary. I think that would have been a great signing. I think that would have been a really great signing for the team. But moving forward without him, I would have been a lot more down on the trade with the Eagles if it didn't work so damn well. I mean, the Dolphins couldn't have possibly figured that they were going to get because I was doing all these spreadsheets. Lewis, you remember, I was doing all these crazy spreadsheets and everything right before the draft. There were and I had scenarios for all the best possible players for the Dolphins. I didn't even have a scenario for Laramie Tunsil because I was like, there's no way he gets to the Dolphins. So it was that good. The Dolphins ended up with the best player in the draft. Laramie Tunsil did not allow a sack in his last season at Ole Miss. Did not allow a single sack. And so when you look at that, that's a great decision. Should have done, sign Adam Jones. Adam Jones was in Miami. He was not in Miami to see the Dolphins. He was in Miami just for being there. And the team still wasn't able to close the deal. Then Alex Boone played the Dolphins for leverage. He was never planning on coming to the Dolphins. He used the Dolphins, which is what happens to you if you're a team that overpays free agents historically. But the things that I think they did perfectly, Arian Foster, Ifo Ekpre Olamahua, but basically they've made a lot of moves that are, I guess, boom or bust. Too many boom or bust moves. A lot of potential for bust. But when you look at that situation, you kind of just got to shrug and say, okay, we're going to take the good with the bad. Because at least what the Dolphins have done is created a situation where players are going to be reaching for higher levels of success. When the Dolphins signed Mike Wallace, everyone was like, okay, maybe he'll be what he was in Pittsburgh. Or when they signed guys like Philip Wheeler and Donnell Ellerbe, those guys were reaching. They were hoping they get better. The Dolphins reached this offseason without overpaying. I don't think they overpaid anyone except for Cameron Wake, but I'm okay with that because he's Cameron Wake. So I think the offseason it's kind of they didn't screw up. They got lucky. They got really lucky in a couple of cases.
All right, so now that we took care of most of the technical difficulties here, so our guys are back. So now, as I originally had planned, Tom Is there anything that you feel the Dolphins should or should have not done in this year's offseason?
Nothing specific. I will say, I, I've said this before, and I get a lot of pushback on it. So maybe I'm off base, but I really see the Dolphins as being kind of a rebuilding team. If you look around the national press, they've still got them in last place this year, and the over/under in Vegas is 7.5 wins. I would have liked for them, under the circumstances, to stay young wherever possible. They signed some older veteran players that I would have rather seen them not sign. And I'm thinking perhaps in particular of Mario Williams. I think he's the kind of guy you roll the dice on and take a risk on when you're looking at a team that you think is going to take the division. And probably, there are a lot of Dolphins fans out there that think they're going to do that. Maybe ownership thinks they're going to do that. But it's not the way that I would have played it. I would have played it like a rebuilding organization. I would have tried to keep guys as young as possible on the roster and keep older veterans to a minimum. Now, some of these guys aren't that old. They're getting up around 30. But so, I mean, I don't have this is a mild complaint. It's not a severe complaint. But generally speaking, I saw them sign guys that I thought were signings to win, when in fact, I thought maybe there should have been more signings to build. And generally speaking, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're exactly right. And this is a question I found myself asking people in the building all off season. I would ask them, "Are you guys rebuilding? Like, what's going on? What are you doing?" And like on the football side, it would have been a perfect roster to rebuild with. You have a quarterback you can work with. You just need one more really bad year to get a few more guys, and then they could be ready to go. They need a corner, they need some linebackers, and they need help with the line of safety. They have guys at some of the tougher positions to build talent at. And it would have made a ton of sense for them to rebuild this offseason. I entirely agree. And they confused me because a lot of signings are rebuilding signings and a lot are now signings. It was a very, very confusing move. But I think you're entirely right that at the end of the offseason, every single move they made is easy to blow up. They could hit the reset button this offseason after this year and really just absolutely detonate everything that they wanted to.
All right, and now that we have Ron back, we had a serious mess here on Skype. So, Ron, turn your mic down a little bit, please.
Okay.
All right.
Is that any better?
Yes, much. All right. So, now the question at hand is there anything that you feel that the Dolphins should or should not have done this offseason?
Kind of felt like the trade for Kiko Alonso and Byron Maxwell was just a way to fill two spots in one shot, just to fill some spots because of just holes. I mean, it may work out. They're still younger guys, but it kind of almost felt that way a little bit. Like, hey, here's a creative and inventive way for me to get a couple guys that are starters right off the bat. So I really wasn't sure. That felt like not a rebuilding move to me, because it felt like, okay, they're trying to find some ways to win now while they do some rebuilding underneath these guys, and maybe they work out, keep them, and maybe they don't, and we trash them. I didn't really love that move because it's just two guys. It's one guy that's on his third team in 3 years, and another guy on his third team in 4 years. Just huge question marks there. I like the drafting of Tunzel, obviously. Obviously, I don't think they planned that initially.
No way.
Obviously
they
not.
Didn't. They were, and their plan was about to absolutely blow up. Everyone I've talked to said Eli Apple was the guy they really liked. Jack Conklin was the guy they liked.
I like that.
And they liked Ezekiel Elliott. And as we all know, none of those guys were on the board. The Dolphins would have been in serious trouble had Laramie Tunsil not been there. The luckiest break of the entire offseason was the Dolphins landing Tunsil. No team had a better stroke of luck than the Dolphins did in that moment. And I just had this recurring fear in that moment. I don't know about you guys. I was afraid they were going to pass on him.
I was very afraid. I was very afraid they're going to pass on him, and I'm so glad they didn't, because I think that, like you said, that's probably the best thing that happened to him all offseason. And even if he turns out to be a bust, which, occasionally happens, I'll stand by him and say that they did the right thing, because what I saw that guy before the draft, I thought he was great. He's so athletic. I thought there's no way they were going to get him. And the fact that he fell into their laps, and the fact that they were smart enough to go ahead and act and take him, I loved it. I thought it was great.
It's a perfect example of a team that is trying to rehabilitate themselves from being overly focused on scheme. The Dolphins just picked the best guy, and then later they went back to scheme in the second round, which was interesting because the first round of the draft doesn't really fit the Dolphins' plan at all. But they were smart enough to realize, we have to deviate from that plan at this moment because of other circumstances. Can you guys imagine Joe Philbin deviating from a plan because of circumstances arising? No.
Well, just if I maybe just take off on Joe Philbin just for a second. And Richie Incognito just said on the Herd with Colin Cowherd that he's played for a lot of coaches that are scared of their own shadow, and Rex is definitely not that. So I wonder who he's talking about there.
Well,
Lewis, I want to bring up something from the past. You remember a couple of years ago, or actually I think it was last offseason, we were talking on the Insider podcast with Keith. And Keith and I both mentioned that we said offensive tackle was a need. And we had talked about it. I talked about it going into the 2014 draft. And I said people don't think about it, but Brandon Albert's never stayed healthy for a full season. He's an older player, and even though he plays a position that he can stay healthy, or he can be effective, I should say, for on into the mid 30s or early to mid 30s. You just don't know that he can. And so left tackle was going to be a need, and I know some people talked about before the incident with La'el Collins that he could have been a pick for the Dolphins.
I love La'el Collins. Sad day.
And so, I mean, that was the top going into the 14 draft, the 15 draft. And then here is one of the best left tackle prospects come out in a while, and he just falls right into their lap. And so, in a sense, as Max was saying, it didn't really fit the initial plan, but it helps out in the long run because now you're filling a keystone position with a top-tier blue-chip talent. I mean, nobody in their right mind suspected the Dolphins would draft Larry Tunsil. If you said that, 2 weeks before the draft, someone would thought they traded up or that you were on drugs. It just wasn't going to happen. He was going to, it just wasn't going to happen. And so now they've got him that he can start immediately at left guard. He can kick out to left tackle, and that's your guy of the future. So it's like they feel a need that they didn't necessarily have now, that they have for the future, and it just fell into place perfectly to do so. Kind of the same way with Devontae Parker. I mean, he was a guy that I know a lot of people were kind of sweating bullets of, the Vikings are going to take him, or the Browns are going to take him. When they didn't, there he was. So, I mean, that's 2 drafts in a row that the Dolphins have really got the guy that they wanted. I mean, it depends on how much they really wanted Todd Gurley, but I mean, yeah, it's just one of those things, and so I think it worked out pretty well.
So what is it that you think that they shouldn't have done? Is there anything in this offseason that you looked at and said, I wish they hadn't done that?
Well, and I kind of agree with the older players, but to me, those guys are just placeholders. And you've got some young players there, especially at the defensive end position. You brought in Andre Branch. I don't know what he's going to bring, but you've got Chris McCain, who they moved to defensive back, full time. I think that's his position. I watched him in the preseason game in Carolina last year. I particularly watched him one set of plays, and he looks lost as a stand-up linebacker. That's not his spot. He's an edge rusher. That's a role I think he can develop in. That's some talent there. if Deion Jordan gets his head on straight, gets reinstated, you've got some youth there that you can develop. So you've got these older players that kind of placeholders until you can rebuild through the draft. I like they didn't really go with the let's build through free agency like they have in recent years. One thing that I wish they would have dealt with is defensive tackle. Pretty much have the same group from last year, and they were underwhelming outside of Donovan Sue. You don't really have anybody that can step into that 3-tech position if Sue can't go. I know you've got some guys like Jason Jones or maybe even Kenneth today that can move inside in a passing situation, but you just don't really have a great deal of depth at the defensive tackle position. You knew the linebacker position was kind of weak, but you added Alonzo, so I mean you've got him in the mix. And so far, everything I'm reading says that they really like the guy. So maybe he can get back up to that standard. I've been kind of looking at some of the linebackers that were available for the 2017 draft. I think that'll be a position they hit pretty hard thin. I don't know. I don't know who all was out there that was available. I don't really remember. I know there's a couple of names, but I don't really think there was any like standout linebackers that like, oh, we've got to get this guy in free agency. So, I think they kind of dealt with it the best way they could. Maybe a couple of cornerback positions they could have looked at. The offensive line part worked out as far as getting some depth there with Bushrod and Tunsil coming in. So yeah, I wish they would have addressed the defensive tackle position, got a little more depth there. I like Leonte Carew. I watched a video with Matt Waldman. He does like it's called like film review or something. He does draft review, different things. And I watched a tape of him recently about Leonte Carew, and it was very interesting. They were talking about how Carew, he's excelled at getting off the press, and how some of my receivers don't really do well with that. And I like what he brings to the table. The only thing I don't like was the trading of future picks. I know it was necessary, but Lewis, I'm a big Ken Hill fan. I believe he's the guy. But if he turns out not to be the guy, that's draft capital you now don't have to put yourself in position to get a quarterback. And it's no longer good enough just to be, a bad team. You've got to, you've got to be in the top 1, 2, or 3 spots, depending on how many prospects there are. Even if they're not, I would argue that Carson Wentz and Jared Goff are not the caliber of prospects that Mariota and Jameis Winston were.
Isn't Carson Wentz about to be deactivated by the Eagles? Something like that.
I understand. They're probably going to use Sam Bradford's trade bait. But you see what happened. Those guys were hot commodities in a kind of a weak quarterback market. So what if Miami's drafting 5th next year and there's only 2 quarterback prospects? That's going to be, several first-round picks or something of that nature, if they need that. I don't think they will, but that's what I didn't like. I like having that extra draft capital to move around, and now they don't have it.
And if all else fails,
there's a little bit of breaking NFL news on Twitter about J.J. Watt. He's starting training camp on the PUP list because he had secret back surgery this offseason.
Secret back surgery?
Well,
he's getting his spine carbon reinforced.
Well, they said he might miss the first couple games of the season.
Wow.
So what does that say about all these tweets that he sends out going, I'm in the gym, I'm working out, and it's like midnight, and he's self-promoting himself to death? Does that mean it's all just nonsense and he had back surgery? And
it means that Cameron Wake is not a liar, and J.J. Watt apparently is. Because Cam Wake is as genuine as they come. So I'm just saying.
Well, what that should say is, first of all, did it say anything about him being injured, or was this some kind of preventative measure, or what was it?
That was my first thought was preventative.
So So the question would be, and a Dolphin fan's concern is like, look, I'm probably the oldest one on this show tonight.
I don't know.
I can tell. I can tell
we
you.
Get a survey here?
Well, regardless, I'm in the top two, and top 2 or 3. And I can tell you, just a couple of years ago, I went and playing some basketball, and my ankle swelled up and hurt for a couple of days, to the point I almost couldn't walk. And I didn't hurt it. I just ran. I just played half court. We didn't run. Just ran half court. I think Jason Taylor said, Father Time is undefeated. So if a guy like J.J. Watt, who is a superior athlete, is having issues, and I know Cameron Wake is a cyborg, but they need to take it easy with him. I know they are. And I know from what I've read and seen from Cameron Wake, he's not the kind of guy who's going to take it easy. But
they're having to hold him back. They're probably going to have to tie him up in a chair.
Eventually, Father Time is going to have his way with Cameron Wake, and so he needs to, they need to be prepared for that. I see him as a starter, and I put quotation marks around starter. I see him as a guy who's going to get fewer snaps than what people think. He's going to be the pass rush specialist, kind of like Jason Taylor was for the end of his career there in Miami. So that's just something to be aware of if it's happening to guys like J.J. Watt and everybody else.
Well, J.J. Watt's getting a lot. J.J. Watt's getting a lot more action too. It's not like even Cam. He's been given spells. As for J.J. Watt, he's like there for every single play, and now he's adding offense to his repertoire as a tight end. It's like, does this dude ever take a break? So it doesn't surprise me that he's starting to break down.
Well, it's kind of sad too, because I mean, Jake Long was on a probably Hall of Fame trajectory for his career, and he just broke down. And it was kind of sad to watch. I mean, you had a guy that, I don't think he was quite the caliber that Joe Thomas was, but he was a guy that stepped in from day one. A lot of people said, and I remember the time, he's a right tackle. I don't know if he can make it at left tackle. The guy came in was just awesome. And then now he's, struggling to find work because he broke down. It's just, it's just sad to see.
Yeah. So, Chad, this is probably going to be the last bit for the show. Is there anything that you wish the Dolphins had or had not done this offseason?
The only thing that really stood out to me is I wish they would have gotten a veteran corner, and that, maybe they still will, but I was kind of expecting them maybe to get Leon Hall. I don't know, maybe he just isn't physically what they think he should be at this point, but I just feel like the rest of their team I feel pretty good about right now on paper anyway, but with Tom Brady, I mean, I know they won't play him the first game against the Patriots, but within his division and the way the NFL has become a passing league, right now Maxwell's their only real veteran corner, and he has question marks himself. And then you throw in Tony Lippett, Xavier Howard, and Bobby McCain. That's just a ton of inexperience, and it's a huge dice roll at the defensive back. So I just feel like that could be our Achilles heel this year. Teams may just light up our secondary, and I think a veteran corner would have made a big difference in that situation. So that's my only negative thing I have is I wish they would have went and got a experienced corner.
Do you wish they had kept Brent Grimes?
It's such a tough question. I want Brett Grimes, the player on the field, but just this last week or two, whatever, when Miko, made a fool of herself yet again. I'm glad to be away from that, because I think the distraction problem with that isn't worth what you get on the field. So I wish they had somebody else like Brett Grimes, on the team right now. I'd feel a lot better. Because I just don't know what to expect out of Lippett and Howard at all, and not much more on Bobby McCain. Those guys just have so few snaps that that's a lot of inexperience in the secondary.
Well, me, Max, and Chad went off on the whole Miko thing, and Ron too last week. So, Tom, I know we ended the show technically, but I'm still actually curious about this. So we're just gonna go on about a little longer about this one bit. Tom, were you privy to the whole Miko Grimes drama that happened?
Yeah, I followed it. I thought it was insulting. I agree with Chad. I think that we can all be glad that the Dolphins aren't dealing with that anymore. I don't get that situation. I just don't understand how someone could be so insensitive to the damage that they're causing. And Brent Grimes, he's on the tail end of his career, boys, and the bigger pain in the rear it is to keep him on, the less likely anybody's going to do it. And she's really hurting him more and more every year. The guy does not have ideal size for a corner. I think that frankly, I thought his skills last year degraded. I thought Brandon Marshall absolutely had his way with him.
He did.
And I think Miko, when you add her on to any sort of doubts that you might have about Brent and his abilities, the combination shortens his career maybe by as much as a couple years.
Duke, do you have anything to say?
Those who've seen this movie, I liken her Twitter responses to the scene in Kill Bill 2 when Uma Thurman and I don't know her name, but the woman in the movie, they're fighting in Bud's trailer, and Uma Thurman's character wins, and the other character is blind, can't see. She's just wildly thrashing about, just swinging, trying to hit anything at all that she possibly can, knowing that she's lost. That's kind of how I envision Miko Grimes on Twitter. She's swinging wildly, trying to hit anything and everything she can. And at this point, people are just like, that's just Miko being Miko. It has escalated. It has gone from being, from just talking about football to now insinuating racism in there. It's awful. And worst of it all is you've got some of her friends from Miami that are supporting her in this,
including Mr. Chris McCain, who you like.
Well, I didn't see anything here. I'm talking about reporters, and you know who I'm talking about. So, I mean, it's like, don't encourage this behavior. And I think it has to do a lot with, it started with that survey she had from the locker room.
Yeah, the one that everybody hates him.
Yeah, who likes, who's still behind field and who's with Tannehill, blah, blah, blah. Now, first of all, to me, that's kind of breaking like a barrier you shouldn't break. And I think Chris McCain actually said it best when the whole Tannehill situation last year with the practice squad trophy, whatever. He said something should be kept in-house. And I personally agree with what he said. And if you're a Dolphins player, look, I guarantee you that there a lot of those guys, they may not like. Rashad Jones may hate Ryan Tannehill, and he may tell Armando Salguero, "I hate Ryan Tannehill," but he says it under the guise of, "I don't want this to get out," and Armando understands that and keeps that. When you start saying this stuff to somebody like Miko Grimes, who has no filter, you never know when she might just up and tweet, "Well, I asked Rashad Jones, and he said he hated Tannehill." Well, guess what? Now that's out in the open. It's going to be news. Now Rashad Jones is going to go into full backpedal mode. Well, I didn't say this, blah, blah, blah. And it's a complete distraction. So how she even was able to do some of the things she did is baffling to me. If I was the player, I wouldn't have told her anything because she's not trustworthy. It's just so.
It's a mess.
That's Tampa Bay's problem now. They can deal with it. And I don't really care what she says about Miami Dolphins or Tannehill or anybody else. Whatever.
Yeah. That's quite a hypothetical you gave, though. Like, couldn't you have picked the less scary player?
Who's that?
It's like if you picked Rashad as your hypothetical, it's like, oh my God, if Rashad Jones hates Tannehill, we're in trouble.
Well, no, I'm just saying, look at, he's a high profile.
I know what you meant.
It feels like, the fifth string cornerback saying that. Nobody cares. He's a high profile guy. And Donaldson Sue said that. But that's the thing. These guys, I'm not been in the locker room. I'm not a reporter. I don't know how all this goes. But the way I see it is there are answers that you give to the reporter and then answers that you give to the person. And, that's why you get standard canned responses. I guarantee every one of us could interview Ryan Tannehill on a different day, and we're going to hear the words excited, trying to get better every day, because that's what he says. Now, who knows what he's like in real life, but that's those canned answers that you get from every athlete. Oh, we're going to try to do better. We didn't do well this game. Oh, they just beat us, blah, 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 same old, cut and paste.
Yeah.
But that's what you do, and they get good at that. When you have somebody that come in there that you possibly you think you can convey trust to, like a player's wife or a friend or something, and then suddenly she or he betrays that trust by saying, oh, I'm going to print this stuff out. I'm a quote-unquote journalist now. Well, then you've got a whole other, situation that becomes a problem, because now what he said something you probably not regret. So that's why I was using that example. So, I don't know what the Dolphins locker room situation will be like, but I have a feeling that some of that stuff will be nipped in the bud.
Well, we're glad that it's no longer a problem. So I just wanted to end on that note, since you guys hadn't actually gotten to give your opinions on the whole Miko Grimes situation. It's over. No one's talking about it more. And from now on, neither will we, at least until the next time she decides to explode all over us, because we keep saying that we don't care, but we do. We really do.
I have to be honest. Miko found her way into my mute filter, and I don't see tweets that mention her at all anymore, especially after this last round. But this one made it into the newspapers, so I read about it.
They've all made it into the newspapers, Tom.
It was particularly bad. It was quite, anti-Semitic. That's really going deep. So, but I don't see the tweets anymore. I really don't care, to tell you the truth. But it does baffle me. She is really damaging his career. And it is going to shorten his career. There are going to be teams that are going to balance putting up with her with his degrading skills, and that imbalance is going to come sooner. That's what I thought.
And by balancing, it's going to affect the pocketbook. I think he stays in Tampa Bay this season because they have $7 million in dead money that they have to pay him. That's a tough pill to swallow for Tampa Bay. I don't know what the cap situation's like, so maybe they don't care. But next season he has zero dead money. He's out. And number one, he's going to have to play at a really high level, which I don't think he will. I think he's at that part of his career where he's going to be good, not great, at best. And then you add her into it. She has another couple of episodes like this. He's gone next season, and I don't see anybody giving him a contract other than the Arian Foster type. You get a 1-year minimum kind of deal with some bonus type stuff in there, and that's it. And then, so she did that all because she didn't have a voice and say her opinions on things. So, that's great. You got on Twitter and you made some friends with Miami media, and you got to go on the radio and you got to say all the stuff. It costs you in the end.
All right.
So it was worth it to her.
All right, so I think we're going to call it a night. We had a lot of good conversations. I really liked the back and forth. I loved all the insight everybody had. Next week is training camp, ladies and gentlemen, so probably the next time we do this show, I don't know if we'll do a show next week just right before it, but if something happens, we probably will. But unless something happens, I think the next time you hear from us live, it'll be right after the first few days of training camp. I will be there. Max will be there. And I believe that Ron and Chad are going to show up. Chad, when are you coming down, man? So we know, so we can all sit together and listen to the beat writers upstairs.
Well, I'll have to touch base. I was kind of waiting to see if they're going to do an official web camp deal, and so.
Oh yeah, they are.
I typically come down with that. So.
I didn't tell you when it was.
Oh no, I didn't know when it was.
Wait, Lewis, if we have to listen to the beat writers, I'm not coming.
Okay, I always sit in the corner right underneath where the reporters are because that's where the best view is. They put them there for a reason.
I'll lose brain cells.
Hey, be nice. Most of them are nice guys.
Yeah, the 3As are cool.
Yeah, they are. And actually, let's be perfectly honest. Chris Perkins is a nice guy too. Like I've talked to him a bunch.
Oh, he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. He's a very nice guy. And there's someone else who I'm forgetting who's okay. They're just like they credential a lot of morons.
Well, we can discuss that at a later date. So
don't
make
forget,
yeah, Mr. Are you gonna say the name that we
Brandon
don't like?
Howard.
Oh, Brandon. No, Brandon.
Brandon Howard, Antoine Staley.
Yeah, Brandon.
Those guys are good follows on Twitter. They give you a lot of other football insight besides can help complete the pass or so and so got an interception.
I like Antoine.
Seem to dig a little deeper. I like those guys.
Yeah, most of those guys are actually pretty good. It's just that it's only a choice few that we just don't like anything. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So you follow me on Twitter at FL Sport Debater. I'll be there every chance I get. Max at the deep end. No, wait, no, that's the old one. So now you follow Max at Himmelrich NFL. And
you can also follow the Deep End Miami for my articles, for the podcast, etc.
All right, and Chad is going to come down eventually at GoFins4SB, and I will.
Sure.
I'm going to give you the information. I thought I already had. I guess I hadn't, but I will now. So
that's when I'll be down there around that time, though, Louis.
And Ron will also be there eventually at Finn's Broadcaster. So you've got a lot of guys to count on for some training camp news if you don't want to follow some of the beat guys. But follow them too. They do give you some good play-by-play. We're gonna try and they're gonna try. I'm kind of play-by-play too. I just do more play-by-play. I do more than just highlights. I do everything. So
I can't put Lewis as a beat writer. That'll be the day.
One day.
Let me just add something in real quick that
sure.
my experience last year in Spartanburg is, we give guys like Omar a lot of crap. He's one of the more prolific training camp guys. He tweets out a lot more stuff. That's not easy. So I watched it last year, and between trying to watch the play happening, there's going at very fast pace, and actually tweet it out and not look like I forgot how to write. Pretty difficult because you miss a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah,
you're constantly looking. You're either looking at your phone and miss plays, or you're watching the plays and then only tweet about one every 5 plays.
Yeah, I found it very difficult. I think I've kind of mastered the art though of super fast tweeting. Just kind of like say this person did this, click. This person did this, click. By the time I've tweeted something else, another play is getting started, and I've got to tweet again. So
I usually have my little brother or my girlfriend tweet. I orate.
So they're just like so you gotta like massage their hands after it's all over, right?
I got like 8. I've got like each of them has their phone logged into my Twitter account. We could all tweet at the same time. It's beautiful.
It's nuts, man. The training camp is not it's not easy out there, folks.
I always tell everyone I do a lot of analysis during training camp. I don't tweet every play. I did it last year and I'll do it again this year. I tweet at the start of pretty much every practice. I'll say, I'm here. I'll give you my thoughts, but follow Lewis if you want play-by-play.
Yep. All right, so that's going to be it for this show. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank my co-host, Chad Ronenbaum, and Max Himmelrich, Chris Early, otherwise known as Duke, Tom Shannon, Ron Kniff, and, of course, my production manager, my little brother. He's done awesome work for us, and I'm really glad to have him. So that's going to be it. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next week, or maybe not. We'll see, for another edition of the PhinManiacs.com.